You ever sit back and watch a game where your gut tells you something's not right? Not just a bad call, not just sloppy execution, but something deeper. Something that feels rigged before the first snap is even played. That's exactly what I felt watching last night's preseason game. Sanders wasn't just stepping into a football game, he was stepping into a setup. It wasn't Rams versus Browns. It wasn't offense versus defense. It was Sanders versus the system. And every decision made by that coaching staff felt like it was designed to make sure he came out on the losing end. And before I dive all the way in, let me tell you this. I've got something special lined up for my viewers. I'm giving away an official jersey to one of you, completely free. All you've got to do is drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed. That's it. I'll be pulling a winner from the comments and subscribers right before the first regular season kickoff. So if you've ever thought about joining this community, now's the time. Hit that subscribe button, leave your take in the comments, and you might just be repping a brand new jersey when the season begins. From the moment he ran onto that field, you could sense the weight of the trap closing in. The atmosphere wasn't about growth or opportunity, it was about humiliation. The Browns didn't line him up for success, they lined him up for failure. They didn't hand him weapons, they handed him anchors. And when the ball was snapped, it wasn't about showcasing what Sanders could do. It was about creating the perfect highlight reel of struggles, the kind of footage a front office can later point to when they want to justify burying a player deeper on the depth chart. And here's the part that blows my mind. They thought nobody would notice. They thought this fan base, this media, would just shrug and say, well, that's what happens when you put in a fifth-round quarterback. But people aren't blind. Analysts aren't blind. Journalists aren't blind. From Stephen A. Smith to Garrett Bush to Skip Bayless to Ochocinco, every single one of them saw through it. They saw the setup for what it was, and they're calling out the Browns and Kevin Stefanski directly for it. Stephen A. had been warning us about this from the very beginning. Even before the preseason began, he was sounding the alarm. He said this wasn't going to be about developing Sanders, it was going to be about designing his downfall, and he nailed it. He said that Sanders starting the opening game wasn't a privilege, it wasn't a reward for potential, it was the perfect setup for failure. Let's throw him in early, let him drown, and then we'll say, see, we told you so. Those were the vibes Stephen A. predicted, and after last night, you have to admit he looks more like a prophet than a pundit. Then Garrett Bush stepped up and ripped the lid off what was really happening. He said the quiet part out loud. Sanders never had a fair chance because he was never given one. He was practicing all week with the third and fourth team. He wasn't running plays with the starters. He wasn't building chemistry with the first-string receivers. He wasn't getting the timing down with the top offensive line. And then, under the bright lights, the Browns tossed him in and expected perfection. That's not coaching, that's sabotage. Garrett Bush was right to call it what it was, a setup that Sanders had no chance of escaping from. When Stefanski was pressed about this, about why Sanders wasn't given reps with the starters, he refused to admit the obvious. Instead, he brushed it off with coaching cliches, hiding behind the phrase rookie development. But tell me, what kind of development is this? What kind of coach says they want to grow a quarterback and then throws him into a live game with players who won't even make the roster? That's not development, that's entrapment. You don't build a quarterback by stacking the odds against him and then shrugging when he trips. That's not leadership, that's cowardice in a headset. Skip Bayless didn't hold back either. He called it exactly what it was, the absolute worst way to handle a young quarterback. Not just poor strategy, not just bad judgment, the worst possible approach. And he made it clear this wasn't an isolated mistake. This was part of a pattern, a disturbing trend inside this organization. Sanders isn't being treated like a future franchise quarterback. He's being treated like an inconvenience, like a problem they'd rather see disappear than develop. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, Skip's right. It's a pattern that screams mismanagement, not mentorship. And then came Chad Ochocinco, who made the point that shut the entire conversation down. He said flat out, I don't care if you're Tom Brady. If you're thrown out there with a group of guys who won't even make the final roster, you're gonna fail. That's it. That's the truth. It wouldn't have mattered if Sanders or Brady or even Patrick Mahomes was under center. That lineup was a death sentence. Ochocinco didn't just highlight the unfairness, he exposed the trick. Sanders wasn't struggling because of who he is. He was struggling because of who he was surrounded by. And yet, the aftermath plays out just like the Browns wanted. The haters come crawling out of the woodwork, ready to slap labels on Sanders. He's not ready. He's overrated. He's just a fifth-round pick. They'll use last night as evidence, as ammunition to dismiss him. But what none of them will talk about is the truth. That this wasn't Sanders failing his team. This was the team failing Sanders. This wasn't proof of his weakness, it was proof of the system's betrayal. But let me tell you what makes Sanders different. Because even after all that, even after being thrown to the wolves, he didn't flinch. He didn't lash out. He didn't point fingers. He didn't stand in front of those cameras and expose his coaches for setting him up. Instead, he did something rare in this league. He owned it. He stood there, took a deep breath, and said, "This one's on me." Think about the weight of that. A rookie quarterback, fresh off being sabotaged, taking every ounce of the blame himself. He broke down the plays. He admitted he could have made sharper reads, kept his eyes in better positions, avoided sacks by making quicker decisions. He took full responsibility, even when we all know the responsibility didn't fully belong to him. That's not just maturity. That's leadership. That's character. That's Sanders telling the world that no matter what storm you throw at him, he's gonna face it head on. And here's why this matters. Because it's easy to be accountable when you're winning. It's easy to own up when you're being praised. But when the deck is stacked against you, when the knives are out, when the setup is this obvious, to take responsibility then, that's strength. That's the kind of strength you can't coach, the kind of strength you can't fake. That's the strength that turns setbacks into comebacks and comebacks into legends. So don't let last night fool you. Don't buy the narrative that Sanders is finished. What happened wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The Browns thought they could bury him, but in trying to kill the hype, they just created a storm. Because now everybody's watching. Now everybody's talking. And when Sanders bounces back, and he will, it won't just be a story. It'll be a statement. Remember this moment. Remember the setup. Remember how the Browns tried to script his downfall. Because one day soon, when Sanders is standing tall, proving every doubter wrong, this game will be the chapter we all look back on. The night they tried to break him and only made him stronger. How much longer can Sanders keep carrying this burden by himself? That's the question that's been echoing in my head after every press conference, every post-game interview, every time I see him step in front of the cameras and say, "It's on me." He's got the courage to shoulder the blame, but at some point, you have to ask, why is he the only one taking responsibility? Why is the weight of every misstep falling squarely on his shoulders, while the people around him, the ones who should be guiding and supporting him, stay silent, or worse, keep stacking the deck against him? This isn't just bad luck anymore. This feels calculated. It feels like a setup. And no matter how much he fights, no matter how many battles he survives, the truth is that Sanders is still trapped in a web he didn't weave. And here's what I can't shake. When does it end? When does the system finally ease its grip and give him the fair chance he's earned? Because what's happening to Sanders isn't an isolated case. It's not just about one young quarterback dealing with adversity. No, this is a symptom of something much bigger, something woven deep into the fabric of the league. If you really watch closely, you'll see it. The NFL isn't just testing Sanders, it's shaping the narrative around him, deciding what box he belongs in, deciding what story they want told. And right now, that story isn't about fairness, it isn't about opportunity, it's about control. Now I've got to give Sanders his due. He's faced all of this with a maturity that's rare for someone his age. Most players would have broken by now. Most would have snapped back at the criticism, folded under the pressure, or lashed out at the people pulling the strings. But not him. He looks straight at the camera and says, "I can do better. I can grow from this." That's not weakness, that's strength. That's the mark of a leader. And it's why fans, even in the middle of all this chaos, still believe in him. But here's the part that cuts deep. No matter how much responsibility he takes, no matter how much growth he shows, the system doesn't care. It keeps placing him in situations where failure is almost guaranteed, then points the finger right back at him when things fall apart. Look at the way the Browns have handled this. Time and time again, Sanders has been thrown into setups that any quarterback would struggle to escape from. Offensive lines collapsing, play calls designed for disaster, circumstances engineered to showcase flaws instead of strengths. And then, when the inevitable happens, the narrative writes itself. Sanders isn't ready. Sanders isn't the guy. But I can't buy into that lie. Because this isn't just a quarterback struggling. It's a young man being mishandled, misrepresented, and misjudged by a system that thrives on keeping certain players in their place. And that's why this story matters.
Because Sanders' fight is bigger than Sanders. His journey is a mirror reflecting what so many other athletes face in silence. How many careers have been cut short not because of lack of talent, but because of politics? How many players have been boxed out not because they weren't good enough, but because they didn't fit the narrative that the league wanted to sell? That's the real tragedy here. Sanders' struggles highlight the way bias and control creep into every corner of the sport, shaping destinies before they're even given a fair chance to unfold. But here's what makes Sanders different: his resilience. Through it all, he hasn't backed down. He hasn't lashed out. He hasn't quit. He's kept his head high, his focus sharp, and his determination unshaken. And while that deserves respect, it also raises the question: how much longer should someone like Sanders be expected to endure this? How many times can a player keep carrying responsibility for circumstances that were never theirs to control? At what point do we stop demanding patience from athletes like him and start demanding accountability from the system that's holding them back? That's why I want to turn this over to you. Do you think Sanders is being treated fairly, or do you see what I see? That this goes deeper than one quarterback story. That this is about the cracks in the league itself. The way young athletes are undermined before they're even given a chance to truly shine. Because I believe this conversation is bigger than Sanders. It's about the future of the game we love. And if things don't change, if we don't demand better, then how many more players will be lost to the same cycle? So drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you see, what you feel when you watch this unfold. Because Sanders' resilience is admirable, but the bigger fight is about fairness, about opportunity, about breaking down the walls that have stood for far too long. And until that fight is won, until athletes like Sanders are finally given the chance to thrive, we're gonna keep asking these questions, we're gonna keep speaking up, and we're gonna keep the spotlight right where it belongs, on the truth. And before we wrap this up, let me just say this. If you've been riding with me through this breakdown, if you feel the same fire and frustration that I do when I see how Sanders is being treated, then don't just click away. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Because this community isn't just about watching football. It's about demanding fairness, calling out the truth, and standing up for the players who deserve better. Every like, every comment, every new subscriber helps this message reach more fans who care just like we do. So let's keep building this conversation together, because trust me, we're only just getting started.